Hello and welcome to Unit 8, Managing Knowledge, Risks and Resources in Advocacy. My name is Neha Karkara. This video lecture will take you through the following topics: securing a strong knowledge base for advocacy, risk assessment and management in advocacy, and budgeting and fundraising for advocacy. Let's begin with why a strong knowledge base supports evaluation advocacy and how it can be secured. At the outset, it is important to understand what we mean by knowledge management. Knowledge management is a component of the organizational knowledge function, explicitly focusing on managing knowledge systems for better organizational performance and improved outcomes. Knowledge management is also a management activity that seeks to enhance the organization, integration, sharing, and delivery of knowledge. In simpler terms, knowledge management can be understood as getting the right knowledge to the right people at the right time. So, why is knowledge management central to evaluation advocacy? Securing and managing knowledge are at the heart of evaluation advocacy efforts. Knowledge management systems support the evaluation function and help to further national evaluation capacities. Knowledge management also enables civil society organizations, WOPEs, and other stakeholders to better influence policy debates and policy processes in favor of evaluation. Moreover, knowledge management supports creation of evidence, which is the backbone of effective advocacy. It also improves visibility of the organization's advocacy work, improves networking, and enables internal dialogue to support external communication. Moreover, the most effective advocacy strategies are knowledge based and leverage lessons from past experiences. A knowledge management system supporting advocacy can facilitate this by gathering, storing, retrieving, and disseminating such information. This system should be demand driven and focus on the needs of its users. Users should determine what knowledge they need to do their jobs effectively and creatively. As part of creating knowledge based organizations, WOPEs need to build an enabling culture for staff to take time during and after major advocacy efforts to reflect on and capture not only successes and positive outcomes, but also failures and lessons learned. Identifying, validating, and properly documenting innovations, lessons learned, and good practices are a necessary part of capturing key learning during an advocacy effort. In the reading material, you can find a template for documenting innovations, lessons learned, and good practices in evaluation advocacy. However, it is important to stress here that knowledge is not exclusively conveyed through documents and reports. Discussions on topics among advocacy practitioners who have relevant knowledge and experience in evaluation advocacy should be an essential part of knowledge management. Convening roundtables and conferences, webinars, organizing e discussions, creating an online library of relevant materials for stakeholders are also useful ways of capturing and sharing knowledge. In the field of evaluation, the MyMNE web platform has been developed as a global online knowledge management system. It was developed in partnership with UNICEF, IOCE, DevInfo, and several other stakeholders to share knowledge on country led monitoring and evaluation systems worldwide. In addition to being a learning resource, the platform is a valuable tool for creating a global community as well as identifying good practices and lessons learned on country led monitoring and evaluation systems. In general, sharing of knowledge, along with the sharing of resources and common objectives around knowledge management, can influence and drive all phases of advocacy and can fuel partners' engagement in policy debates and processes. The development of the knowledge management strategy must itself be built into the WOPE's annual work plans so that the resources are secured. The knowledge management strategy should also outline roles and responsibilities, as well as processes and mechanisms for knowledge generation and management among coalition members and within organizations. Above all, the knowledge management strategy should be linked to and should support the evaluation advocacy strategy. As an example, here it is interesting to note African Evaluation Association or AFRIA's efforts on knowledge creation and exchange using various tools and strategies. Every 2 years, AFRIA organizes a conference, gathering evaluators from Africa and outside the region. AFRIA conferences have generally gathered between 500 and 700 people from roughly 60 countries around the world. These conferences are attended by people interested in evaluation, coming together from all sectors: government, donors, academia, NGOs, and consultants. These participants bring with them a range of evaluation experience. Moreover, as an experience sharing and mentoring tool for evaluators within Africa, a listserv was developed in 2002 which has more than 600 members. This listserv helps to share evaluation tools, methodologies, and discussions on evaluation approaches and paradigms. Here, members can also request for peer assistance and guidance. AFRIA's website also serves as a knowledge management tool, featuring national evaluation associations and evaluation resources. It also hosts AFRIA's e-newsletter, which helps to share experiences and information for evaluators within the continent. In addition, the African Journal of Evaluation was developed as part of AFRIA's comprehensive efforts to strengthen evaluation capacity in the continent by providing a platform for the African community to document emerging evaluation theories and practices and providing an opportunity for cross fertilization of ideas and methodologies across disciplines. Finally, Eval Mentors, an initiative of Eval Partners, provides support and mentoring to emerging African national VOPs, as well as emerging junior professionals through peer to peer support to help them gain practical evaluation skills and experience in the continent. Using these range of knowledge management tools and processes, AFRIA is able to build a strong knowledge base, build capacities in evaluation, create evaluation knowledge networks, and strengthen evaluation advocacy. Now let's move on to another important part of advocacy planning, which is risk assessment and management. It's important to venture into advocacy aware that there are risks associated with advocacy. Although to some extent unavoidable, it is important to consider risks, challenges, and potentially negative situations when planning advocacy and before you engage in any advocacy activities. Challenging power relations and lack of transparency through advocacy can result in a possible backlash and conflict in some cases. Potential risks might also arise from your choice of tactics, especially those that involve public actions and events. Partnerships, for example, with political associations, can bring in added risks. Moreover, using unreliable evidence that does not stand up to scrutiny can increase risks in advocacy. Finally, the political environment itself can bring with it its own set of risks and challenges. The risks may involve damage to reputation, damage to relationships with stakeholders, partners, or government, and may also undermine the organization's legitimacy. Working in coalitions and partnerships may also involve the risk of loss of distinctive identity and of quality control. However, there are several ways you can minimize the risks associated with advocacy. The first way is to make informed judgments about the kind of advocacy risks that are acceptable and in which situations you will back off. Sometimes it can be difficult to decide whether it is more important to speak out strongly and risk going against the authorities or to stay silent and risk losing legitimacy. Such decisions must be made together with your members and constituents. In everything you plan to do, you must consider the impact of advocacy actions on all the stakeholders to make sure they are not exposed to any unnecessary risk. Risk can also be minimized by carefully planning your initiative. It is important to understand the issue, the political context, and the target audience. The analysis underpinning advocacy can provide opportunity to learn about any risks involved in advocacy. A careful selection of advocacy activities, messages, and messengers, as well as tactics, can help to minimize the risks associated with advocacy. Pursuing private dialogue and engagement or an expert informant role generally will be of lower risk than conducting a media campaign or trying to confront high level officials on a controversial issue. As you consider an advocacy approach and role, consider not only your chances of succeeding, but also the risks of any unintended consequences. When framing your advocacy around evidence, ensure that it follows high quality standards. This requires VOPs and other stakeholders to work towards strengthening the supply of evaluations as well. Another effective way to manage risk is to maintain strong communication within your own advocacy team. Sometimes advocacy messages designed for one audience can be received very differently by others. Finally, remember scenario planning, deciding what happens if. is a useful way for WOPEs and other stakeholders to prepare for different situations and finding ways of responding. However, even after assessing and finding ways to manage potential risks, we still need to be prepared for trouble. This is because advocacy depends on many factors and may not unfold as expected. There are several strategies you can use to be prepared for any problems you may encounter. For example, stay in touch with political trends, anticipate the things that can go wrong, be prepared for the media, even if you aren't using media as an advocacy strategy. Treat your opponents with respect. Decide in advance what risks are unacceptable. And finally, always be prepared to stop. In the reading material, please look up the risk management matrix that can be used as a tool to help analyze risks in advocacy. Now we come to budgeting and fundraising for advocacy. Advocacy is resource intensive. It requires investments of funds, staff time, and materials. The resources available for advocacy often change the shape of the advocacy strategy and its planning. It is also a critical factor in sustaining advocacy over the long term. Therefore, it is essential to know the available likelihood of resources for an advocacy issue at the outset. So, how do we determine how much will it cost to run an advocacy project? To begin with, include the core costs of maintaining and strengthening advocacy capacity as well as resources needed for specific actions. Core costs would include team functioning costs, for example, travel, communication costs, staff recruitment, team development, and capacity building. It should also include advocacy planning coordination costs, including monitoring the implementation of the plan and evaluation, as well as research. Then consider advocacy activities and campaigning core costs. Example, preparing introductory campaign information, campaign materials, conferences, and events. Other costs include networking with government at national and regional levels, example, attending conferences, policymakers and donors trips, policymaker events, and representational expenses. Finally, also include generic coalition and staffing costs, as well as any miscellaneous expenses. When it comes to fundraising for advocacy, mobilizing funds for advocacy serves as an agenda for evaluation advocacy as well. Some ways to mobilize resources for advocacy may include influencing donors and institutions to fund certain issues, encouraging individual supporters to give to advocacy, accepting funds from the private sector, and sharing resources in alliances and coalitions. This is an additional area that can benefit by creating strategic partnerships. In fact, the analysis underpinning the evaluation advocacy strategy should take a close look at the opportunities to mobilize additional resources. But even though it may be difficult to raise sufficient funds, it does not mean that you should give up. You can carry out a successful campaign with modest financial means, with leadership commitment and energy of staff and allies. Of course, there are expensive and inexpensive ways to pursue each strategy. Hiring a public relations or a consulting firm, for example, can be an important way to communicate your key advocacy messages, but it is costly. Holding meetings, writing media commentary, or arranging site visits are relatively lower cost activities. In many ways, fundraising parallels the advocacy process itself. You must set realistic goals, identify target audiences, develop persuasive messages to reach those audiences, build alliances and trusting relationships, and leverage decision making at donor institutions. Too often, fundraising is seen as a last item on the agenda, but without resources, your advocacy effort will not go too far. Here are some things to keep in mind while fundraising. The laws which govern the giving and receiving of donations vary from country to country. Therefore, before you begin soliciting contributions, do some preliminary research. Consider questions such as: are there restrictions related to the use of donations for advocacy or political action? Are the amounts that individuals or organizations can contribute for advocacy limited? Remember to explore all potential funders carefully. Sometimes agencies wish to support initiatives in the communities in which they work. However, funders have an agenda or certain conditions attached to their donations. Make sure that these agendas do not compromise your advocacy objectives. If their conditions might conflict with your goals, you may decide not to take their money or contribution because it will likely harm or weaken your advocacy effort. Depending upon the donor agency, certain kinds of information, language, and presentation style will elicit a positive response from funding sources. Research each of your funders individually to learn about their particular interests and preferences. Just as in advocacy, relationships are key. Invest time and energy in getting to know individuals at funding agencies. Ask your members for contributions. Membership fundraising reduces your dependence on large donors and can give members a sense of purpose and renewed enthusiasm when they see that their contributions are making a difference. And finally, avoid dependency on a few sources. Work to diversify your funding base. Finally, donors generally like to see a well run and efficiently managed organization and advocacy. They'd also like to see a good strategy to reach your advocacy goals. Donors also like to see what is it that distinguishes your work from others. What are the reasons your work is important and necessary? And finally, what any previous contribution they made has accomplished. In the end, always remember the golden rule of fundraising: raise more money than you spend. And lastly, do not forget that you have to spend money to raise money. With this, we come to the end of Unit 8. Thank you for taking this video lecture.